Making this wooden box is a great way to demonstrate your woodworking skills while creating a practical gift that will be treasured for years. The heart and bow on the top will proclaim your love, and the craftsmanship will speak for itself. I used purple heart for the heart, cherry for the bow, top and bottom, and walnut for the round box. The project will take some skill and patience, but I'll take you through it step by step. It's 3 days until Christmas. So, what am I starting? Valentine's. Now, seriously, there's no point in making any more Christmas items. Whatever I don't sell in the next 2 days is just going to get boxed up until next year. This one is from Steve Good, one of my favorites for providing patterns. This has a round box. He's calling it a Valentine round box. I've got the parts laid out already. Steve gives excellent instructions here for anyone without a lot of experience. He shows how to lay it out and how the heart says, "Love you," and the bow will be cut simultaneously from 2 pieces of stock. There's a page showing the box parts, and then he shows how to put the whole thing together step by step. He also includes full-size drawings for each part, so all you have to do is download the file, print it out, and you're ready to start building. I selected enough stock to make 2 of the Valentine's round boxes. I assembled the wood for the heart and bow as a sandwich using double-sided tape. You'll see why when I start cutting. There's a 1/2-inch piece of cherry on the bottom and a 1/4-inch piece of purple heart at the top. At first, I thought of using maple for the lighter colored wood, but I saw some cherry on my storage rack that looked good against the purple heart. I took another piece of 4/4 cherry and resawed it down to 2 1/4 pieces for the top, spacer, and bottom for the box. I finished my stock selection with a small piece of 8/4 walnut that was the perfect size to make 2 round compartments for the boxes. I'm happy with my stock selection. I attached the patterns to the wood using scroll saw tape, and I'm ready to get started making sawdust. I'll start cutting with the easy parts, the bottom, top, and spacer. These are all cut from 1/4-inch thick cherry, which I made by resawing a long piece of 4/4 cherry on the table saw, then completing the process on the thickness planer. I use enough thin material that I frequently resaw to obtain what I need by this method. If you want to learn more about that process, I'll leave a link to my video on the screen and in the description. I'm using a number 3 Pegasus modified geometry blade to cut the 1/4-inch material. I've tried and tested many brands and types of blades over the years, and this series is my go-to blade. I determine what blade size to use by taking into account the thickness of the wood, the hardness of the wood, and the complexity of the pattern I'm cutting. I'll leave a link to my video on that subject as well. Cutting circles isn't tricky, but you do have to be careful to stay right on the cut line. I cut a piece for the top and a slightly smaller one that will be the spacer. The purpose of the spacer is to ensure the top is centered on the box and to keep the top from moving out of place. You want both pieces cut accurately so they look good and function correctly. I usually cut right on the line, but some woodworkers prefer to cut just outside the line to later sand the piece down to the correct diameter. You can choose whatever way works best for you. I peeled the patterns off and held the 2 parts together so you can see what this subassembly will look like when we get to the glue-up phase. The 8/4 walnut I'm using for the box is 1 3/4 thick, so I need to switch from a number 3 to a number 12 Pegasus modified geometry blade. This series of blades has reverse teeth, meaning teeth are facing in both directions, and the blade needs to be mounted to do most of the cutting on the downstroke. The way I determine how to mount the blade is to hold the blade in my right hand and then gently rub the teeth against my left thumb. There will be slight resistance in one direction and much resistance in the other. That's the direction most of the teeth face, and you want that as the downward direction to mount the blade. I drilled a pilot hole just inside the line to cut the middle from this block. I rate walnut as medium hardness, but cutting this center circle will take some time due to its thickness. I know from experience I tend to subconsciously put extra pressure on the blade to speed up the cutting, so I'll work at keeping that under control. Putting extra pressure on the blade does not speed things up. There are several possible consequences, none of them desirable. The first possibility, and most likely in my experience, is that the blade will flex. This results in a curved rather than a straight 90-degree cut. If the flex is great enough, removing the waste piece when done cutting can become difficult because the cut was off from 90 degrees. A second possibility is for the blade to overheat, and an overheated blade can break or burn the wood. A broken blade is mostly an inconvenience, but sanding it to remove the burn marks later can become frustrating and time-consuming if the blade burns the wood. Skipping to the end of this cut, I can demonstrate what I was explaining. When I pick up this block, I should be able to push the waste piece out through the bottom, but as you can see, it only goes so far before it stops. This indicates I was putting too much pressure on the blade and it flexed, leaving a cut that was a couple degrees off from 90. However, when I push from the bottom up, the center circle waste comes out easily. I took the blade out of the lower blade holder to look at it more closely, and it looked like it might be slightly bowed, but not as bad as I've seen happen in the past. I still need to make the outside cut on this piece though, and I would like that to be as accurate as possible, so I'll replace this blade with a new one. Scroll saw blades are relatively inexpensive, so this isn't a big deal. I saved the most challenging cuts for last. As I mentioned when setting up the patterns, this sandwich consists of a 1/2 inch thick piece of cherry on the bottom and a 1/4 inch piece of purple heart on top. I'll cut a heart shape with the words "love you" from the purple heart and the bow from the cherry. The reason for the sandwich is so the parts are cut at the same time to ensure they'll fit together perfectly. If you cut these individually, the odds are there would be spots where the pieces overlapped and or spots where there would be gaps. Neither is acceptable. I thought about cutting the letters from the heart before taping the two woods together, but I was uncomfortable with that approach. I wasn't sure how it could go wrong, but I envisioned some problem that would ruin my efforts in cutting the letters. Purple heart is expensive and my time is valuable, so I opted to proceed in the manner the design showed. Typically, I use a number 7 or number 9 Pegasus modified geometry blade for 3/4 material. Still, for this series of cuts, the overarching factor in determining blade size is the complexity of the pattern. The letters need to be cut crisply to look good, and a number 7 or number 9 blade would not be the best choice for cutting letters this small. A larger blade would also mean the fit between the heart and bow would not be as tight. I chose a number 5 for this part of the project. I've cut a lot of letters over the years, and in doing so, I've developed practices that work well. The first is to stay on the inside of the line when you cut letters, instead of cutting right on the line for most cuts. Here's why. Letters like the O are made with a font like a stencil font that forms the letter with two halves. This is because the center part would otherwise fall out, leaving you with an oval or circle hole rather than the letter O. The two halves that form the letter are usually close together at the top and bottom. If you cut right on the line, you'll likely only leave tiny pieces of material that can easily break and ruin the letter. I leave a small safety margin by cutting on the inside of the line. Cutting on the inside of the line is also good practice because letters are often spaced close together. A safety margin between letters lessens the possibility they may run into one another and ruin the workpiece. It's happened to me, and I do my best to ensure it doesn't happen again. If you don't have much experience with the scroll saw, cutting letters takes some practice. The most challenging part for a newbie will likely be making the sharp corners on several letters. Here's how I do them. The letter E has 5 places where 90-degree turns are required. I threaded the blade through the pilot hole and then cut to the nearest corner. When I reached the corner, I eased off the pressure on the blade slightly, just enough so it was no longer cutting. Then I used the curve just created, plus the waste space, to turn the workpiece to the next direction I wanted to cut. I followed the line to the next corner, using the same procedure of utilizing the saw blade's kerf plus the waste material space to pivot the wood to the next direction I wanted to cut. Once you've done this a few times, it should become easily repeatable, and you can make 90-degree sharp corners anytime they're needed. It's slow going with a number 5 blade in this thick material sandwich, but that's to be expected. I know I've said this before, but it's worth repeating. Scroll sawing is not a hobby for impatient people. I cut the exterior of the heart and bow and then set aside the rest of the 2-wood sandwich to cut the second heart and bow later. The next step was to make the cut that separated the bow from the heart. The 2 kinds of woods are held together with double-sided tape. So, for now, I set aside the heart to cut the bow into its parts. There are also 3 small pieces from the bottom of the heart attached to the piece I just removed. From this point on, I need to handle the pieces carefully so I don't lose any and to keep them appropriately oriented until I come to the glue up phase. I cut the main part of the bow and then I cut it into the 3 sections indicated by the lines on the pattern. That middle section is small, and while cutting it, I was very careful where I placed my fingers. When used properly, the scroll saw is a safe power tool, and proper use dictates keeping your fingers from getting too close to the blade. I carefully set these pieces aside, and I'll return to them shortly when it's time for the glue up. The next part can only be described as tiny or even minuscule. I apologize that you can't see this very well. My right hand blocked the camera for much of this shot. I needed to keep a finger on this piece because if I didn't, it would fly off the saw's table once it was severed from the larger piece. I was afraid I'd never be able to find it if that happened. This is part of the heart that will be visible between parts of the bow. It took a few more cuts to separate all the parts. Some of them belong to the heart and some of them belong to the bow. I set them all back in place next to each other on a counter next to the scroll saw to avoid confusion as to which parts fit where when I remove the double-sided tape and assemble the parts on the box's top. After cutting all the wood sandwich parts, I pulled the layers apart and peeled off the double-sided tape. Then I placed together the 1/4-inch pieces for the heart and the 1/2-inch pieces from the bow to see what this would look like when completed. It was an interesting process cutting interlocking pieces together in this manner. The plan showed how to shape the bow to make it more realistic, and I'll perform that step before I glue the pieces together. The lid spacer was a tiny bit too large to fit inside the box, so I used my disc sander to trim it down, and now it fits perfectly. I used a piece of 120 grit sandpaper by hand to remove the fuzzies from the bottom of the piece and soften the edge a little so it would be more pleasing to the touch. I squeezed some glue onto one side of the spacer, then I used an acid brush to spread the glue evenly around the surfaces. I ensured there was glue to the edges because I didn't want the two pieces to separate later. When I placed them together, I also ensured the grain ran in the same direction on both pieces. Wood expands and contracts with changes in temperature and humidity, and pieces glued together in cross-grain situations are more likely to crack or split. These pieces need to be clamped while the glue dried, so I grabbed some small spring clamps from the rack behind me. I placed the clamps at 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 9 o'clock, and it occurred to me that this explanation would work for my audience because you're all older, but how would I explain that placement to a young person today? I found that many of them grew up with digital clocks and they don't even know how to read an analog clock. That means they don't understand the military phrase, "I've got your 6." It means the song by Chicago, 25 or 6 to 4, would make no sense either. It boggles my mind. But I digress. The next step was to glue the side to the bottom. The side is thin, so I switched to my glue bottle with a tiny tip to spread the glue onto this wood. I used the fingertip to spread the glue around on this surface. To clamp the assembly, I utilized the vise on the edge of my workbench. The vise held half the box in place, and I added 2 F-clamps to the top half. The last step of the glue up will be to add the heart and bow to the top. I started with the main part of the heart, added glue, and spread it with my fingertip. I added 1 spring clamp on either side to hold it in place. The first attachment I tried didn't remove much material, so I removed that bit and tried another type of attachment. I recently purchased a set of sanding discs from IDC Woodcraft, I'll leave a link in the description, and installed the 120 grit sander. The others were finer grits, and I knew I needed the 120 grit, or something even coarser, to remove much material. This attachment did a better job removing material, but not as much as I would have liked. The bow pieces are much too small to sand on my disc sander or belt sander, so I elected to skip those and settle for the amount of sanding I could do with the Dremel tool. I put this section of the bow in its place, partly surrounded by the heart. Before shaping any more parts, I thought it best to glue this part in place, so I did that. The central part of the heart was glued and clamped in place, and the way this part nestled against it ensured the part would be glued precisely where it should. The following few parts would also be placed so it was almost impossible to misplace them. I shaped each remaining part and glued them to the top as they were completed. Once all the pieces were in place, I added 2 more spring clamps on the bottom parts of the bow. That should ensure everything is held in place while the glue dries. This was an interesting glue-up. It was more like putting puzzle pieces together than the usual butt joints and such. I'll give the glue time to dry, and then I'll give the box and the top several coats of spray polyurethane finish. Boxes are fun to construct, and they make excellent gifts. Making this box, you will learn a technique for cutting interlocking parts simultaneously to ensure a perfect fit when they're put together. This box is made from 3 kinds of wood and looks striking wherever it's displayed. Did you like the design? Are you going to make one for your significant other? If so, what woods will you use? A like would be appreciated as it helps me to grow the channel. If you haven't already done so, you know how to subscribe, but you don't have to wait to see more scroll saw magic. Suggestions for the next 2 videos to watch are on the screen now.